The next part gets into a little bit of some of the technical issues when it comes to dealing in business. He says that whatever contract it is that you enter into in order to earn a living, then it should comprise of four basic things. The first is validity. The second is fairness. The third is ihsan, or seeking perfection or benevolence. And the fourth is concern for your faith. And so what we'll do is we'll look at the first of these, which is validity of a contract in brief. And then we'll look at the other three at a later date. So the first thing he says in terms of validity, if you're talking about a sale, if you're talking about a sale, a transaction, then there's three pillars to your transaction. The first is the contracting party, the merchandise or the object of sale or service, and then the contract itself. So these three things have to be taken into consideration. The contracting party, meaning the one that wants to make the purchase, the merchant, the one that is selling, it's a couple things here. He says, you cannot enter a contract with someone that is mentally insane, that has no mental capacity, because they're not mukallaf, right? They're just not, they're not morally responsible, right? And entering into such a contract, they don't have the capacity to understand what it is that they're doing. And so the contract is void. It's not valid. And the same thing goes for a child, sabi, which is a young child. You don't enter into contracts with them or business deals with them unless you know that their parents, their father, or their guardian has given them express permission, and you know that. Otherwise, you should stay away from those types of deals. There's some other nuances here. So this is, like I said, very, very brief, but there's some other categories of people that you have to take into consideration when you start to buy and sell, etc. Like, for example, the blind. It was said that trading with the blind, according to the Hanbalis, is valid. Buying and selling. The Shafi'i method, they said, la tasih. It's not valid. And it probably has a lot to do with the fact that they cannot see the product or the good that they are going to purchase. And so there can't really be any, or it's hard to achieve a state of contentment with the purchase. The potential to cheat is far too great. He says, as for those that are oppressive, that the most of their wealth is haram, how do you handle that? How do you deal with somebody who the majority of their wealth is impermissible? He says it's terribly inappropriate to enter into a deal with them or to trade with them in something that itself, the object itself, is haram. Right? So if you're bartering or buying and selling and you know that this is stolen, I'm buying a stolen good. I'm buying an illegal product. I'm buying something that's misappropriated, etc. Or I'm trading for something that's illegal. Then this should definitely be avoided. The second pillar here is the merchandise, or the good of the service, if you will. And this is what the object, if you will, the ownership of it is going to move from the tajir, the merchant, to the contracting party, or the purchaser. So he says a couple of things that are impermissible to sell. Dogs, for example. He says it's impermissible to sell dogs because dogs are najisul ayn. Like, the dog is najasa. The entire dog is najis. It cannot be cleaned. You can't shine it up and shampoo it up, conditioner and all that, blow drying the hair. That's not going to change the fact that the dog is najis, and you cannot sell najasa. You can't sell najasa.
It's also permitted to have dogs in certain circumstances, right?
Not selling.
Okay.
Yeah. become about one and train it up. Yeah. He says also it's impermissible to sell hasharat, which are insects. To sell the lute and the reed, musical instruments. To sell statues, figurines made of clay or whatever. And also impermissible to sell something which cannot be handed over, that cannot be given, whether physically or legally, it cannot be given. So the examples that he gives here, something that you cannot give physically is selling a bird in the sky. See that bird up there? $20 and it's yours. It's an eagle or whatever. It's a falcon. $20 and it's yours. Yeah, I own it. But you can't give it. It's in flight. Or something that legally you can't give, like something that's been mortgaged. The complete ownership is tied up with some other arrangement. And so you can't transfer ownership. So you cannot sell that which has been mortgaged. Right? You have to deal with that contract first, and then you can set up another one. The third thing is and this is the last portion of this, is the actual contract itself. And a lot of, what we're looking at is the verbal contract. And the verbal contract consists of two parts. There's an offer and there's an agreement. So the offer is when someone says, I'll sell you this for $1. This cup of coffee right here for $1. And then the agreement is when you say, I accept this for $1. And then you pay and you take, and the deal is done. Right? So these are the two parts. He says, if the agreement comes before the offer, the deal's invalid. Like if you say, I'll buy it. I want to buy that coffee. And then the person goes, I'm selling it for $1. You entered into an agreement that you had no idea what it was. He could have said, you said, I'll buy that coffee. And he says, well, it's $100. Now what? All right, so these are some of the rules here when it comes to buying and selling. The other thing is, so this is one opinion. There's another opinion that says it is permissible to do that. And then of course you can always get out of your contract if you have not departed ways. If you haven't parted ways, so long as you're still there, you can renege on the contract. However, this is one of the opinions that is quite strong. And another thing that they talk about is a transactional arrangement or a purchase where there's no offer, there's no agreement. It's just simply transactional. A person comes up, they put $1 on the table, and they walk away with the coffee. I take the $1 off the table and I put it in my pocket. There were no words, there was no offer, there was no agreement to the offer. It was a simple, silent transaction. Done. So the scholars, they differ on whether this is valid or not. Imam Ahmad and his school have deemed that it is valid. However, there are those from that same school, Al-Qadi Abu Ya'la, who considered that it was only valid if it was done for things which are cheap, like a cup of coffee, not like a house. Right? Come in with a big, and then key, and no, there has to be an explicit offer, and there has to be an explicit acceptance of that offer. And so it's good to avoid, that the difference of opinion there is what he says, Abu Ya'la, in order to be scrupulous, in order to be very particular. The other thing that is mentioned, and this is where we'll conclude here for this session, is the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been very stern when it comes to the issue of interest. And so it's important that we stay away from that, stay away from falling into interest, which is of two types, riba al-fadl and riba al-nasi'ah, right? So there's two types. Riba al-fadl has to do a lot with the various types of commodities or what do you call the naqd, currencies. Either a commodity, there's 6 different types of there's a currency and there's commodities that they cannot be exchanged like kind for like kind unless they're equal. So you can't exchange 5 grams of gold for 8 grams of gold. You can't exchange 5 pounds of dates for 10 pounds of dates. You see, that's riba al-fadl. Fadl means excess. So you can't do this excess. If you cross the categories of things, so you do, a gram of gold for 10 pounds of dates, 1 gram versus a lot more of dates in terms of weight, that's certainly permissible so long as it's done at that time and not delayed for later. And then riba nasi'a is much like what we see in the typical loan today, where you nasi'a means to delay, where you take money and you repay it with a charge. I'm going to loan you $1,000 and you can pay it back to me after a month, but you have to give me $100. So here's $1,000. There's $1,100 involved. So this is considered riba and nasi'a. And so here, he just draws that to our attention. And there's a lot more details that are under that. And at some point we'll discuss those, inshallah. Also, the various other things that riba applies to, those types of commodities, which you have to be careful of. And a person that's involved in business and trade and commerce, etc., they should be aware of the various different conditions of the different types of transactions and deals that can be arranged. Whether that's a bay' salam, which is essentially where you pay for something in advance to receive the good later, like if you're talking about harvest or something of that nature. Like ijara, which is like a lease, or mudaraba, which is basically like profit and loss sharing. Somebody puts up the money and somebody puts up the labor, and then you work out how you're going to share the profit and loss, or a different type of partnership. So all of those things, if you're working and you're earning a wage, you're likely to run into those things at some point. And it's important that you understand how they function and the do's and don'ts, so that your wage is not spoiled by committing something impermissible, a moral infraction, right? So, those are just a couple of things that you certainly have to take into consideration in your work life.